way our minds work, how we perceive and understand, affects our emotions. Or at least that's what psychologists think. This gives psychology a very broad remit indeed. It's probably not surprising, therefore, that psychologists end up believing lots of very different things about the same subject, or go on sometimes to disagree with each other about what the psychology of it all is actually saying. As a result, and to make sense of the inevitable infighting that would otherwise take place, psychologists split themselves into different tribes and traditions. One of the most important of these is the behaviouralist way of thinking. This argues that what we can be seen to do and how we've been taught to think are linked. One directly affects the other. It has some interesting things to say about fear, but shockingly, the way they were discovered was, spoiler alert, a little frightening in itself. It's not easy to describe the origin story of the behaviouralist tradition, but as a modern concept, it was probably developed first following the work of Ivan Pavlov, the father of classical conditioning, who, at the dawn of the 20th century, showed how dogs could be trained to shut down or excite their bodies instinctively in response to the environment around them. This claimed that fear was actually a trained or conditioned response and could, therefore, be inserted into, isolated from, and even measured in human behaviour. Conditioning as a research topic became a bit of a cause célèbre in the psychology world, but the so-called Watson and Rayner study of 1920 is perhaps the most infamous of these analyses. The ethical basis for the Watson and Rayner project, better known as the Little Albert study, was at best criminally indifferent to the interests of its subject. It saw little difficulty in teaching the eponymous Albert, a very young infant, to anticipate and fear the presence of a rat by linking its arrival with a startling and very loud noise. The fear remained, even when the loud noise was removed. Yes, this is a contemporary recording of Watson, Rayner, and, it's claimed, poor little Albert. Albert had previously enjoyed being with such animals, but the association became so effective that some say it led to a fear of other white-haired creatures, and even to men wearing Santa Claus or Father Christmas masks. This may be no more than satire or a joke that we now take seriously. Indeed, there's evidence that the rat used in the experiments was actually brown. The study is well known and regularly cited in psychology, sometimes as a cautionary tale, but it's worth unpacking a little bit. Whilst the methods used were clearly cruel, it did illustrate that a relationship could be forged between seemingly random events and observable forms of fear. This suggested that fear, and indeed a range of alternative states such as rage and love, could be encouraged in us all if we are exposed to stimuli designed to bring this about. Watson discovered very few forms of pre-existing or natural states of fear in his subjects. Indeed, only two seem to be acknowledged: a loud noise and the loss of care or physical support. The implications of this type of conditioning stretched well beyond the concept of emotion and extended to all forms of education and learning. So much so, Watson went on record to proclaim that given access to children early enough and for long enough, he could teach anyone to be a doctor or a lawyer, regardless of their intellectual talents. It was all a question of habit and motivation, apparently. It's not really known what happened to Albert, the child of one of Watson and Rayner's co-workers. It's said that he was removed from the experiment before deconditioning could be completed, even though this reactive concept hadn't really been developed at the time in any event. Researchers have tracked down 2 potential candidates, but the case for each Albert appears inconclusive. One of them suffered during infancy from an accumulation of fluid on the brain. Doctors argue it was this that offers a more plausible explanation for some of the behaviours recorded as illustrative of conditioning, making Watson and Rayner's claims exaggerated, to say the least. The other Albert appeared to have lived a full life. His family remembered him showing a distinct, if unproblematic, aversion to animals, but this seemed to have had no more than an unremarkable hold on his existence. By the way, no, this is not him. Watson and Rayner's ideas, particularly about education, have been criticised as highly selective, subjective and partial, and as stemming largely from Watson's own personal beliefs and prejudices, rather than from the evidence as it actually emerged at the time. Nevertheless, the outcomes on conditioning have, in large part, been broadly and more carefully substantiated since, and as unpalatable ethically as these ideas were on discovery, and as uncertain as some of the first findings have been shown to be, they've brought much insight into how fear is first created and then works within us. Do you agree? Is fear a conditioned response? Why is it then that we can't seem to decondition all fears, rather than just some of them? And what about fears we all seem to share in common, even when our upbringing has been very, very different? Let us know, and let me know what you'd like to know more about. Give us a like or a share. And if you're enjoying the story of fear so far, subscribe. It's free and takes just one fear-free click. Regardless, keep watching, take care, and remember, we have nothing to fear but ignorance.